Tonight at 10, a furious response from Apple, the computer giant, after a record tax payment is ordered by the European Commission. Apple, whose European HQ is in Ireland, is accused of benefiting from an illegal tax deal.
This decision sends a clear message. Member states cannot give unfair tax benefits to selected companies.
Apple says it's done nothing wrong and will appeal against the ruling, as will the Irish government.
Our responsibility as the Irish authorities is to collect the tax that is owed to us, and we do that in a consistent way, in a transparent way, and fully in accordance with the laws of this country.
We'll have the latest from Dublin, where Apple has been accused of paying corporation tax of less than 1%. Also tonight, 6,500 migrants rescued yesterday in the Mediterranean. The Italian Coast Guard says it was the busiest day for several years. In Libya, government forces say they're now close to expelling all IS fighters from the city of Sirte after 3 months of fighting. The controversial badger cull in England is being extended to try to prevent the spread of tuberculosis in cattle. And we meet the former Royal Marine who's training hard for the forthcoming Paralympics in Rio.
Here in the south, outrageous and a disgrace as the boss of the troubled Southern Health resigns. Families question why she'll keep her salary. And he nearly died in this crash. Now Pete Birch has a special way to thank those who saved his life.
Good evening. The computer giant Apple has been accused by the European Commission of enjoying an illegal deal which has produced huge tax benefits. So the Commission has ordered Apple, whose European HQ is in Ireland, to pay £11 billion in back taxes to the Irish government. Apple says it will appeal against the decision, as will the Irish government. Apple made a net profit of more than £40 billion in the financial year 2015. Our business editor, Simon Jack, has more details now. He reports from Dublin.
Apple is one of the world's richest companies.
Hello. Bonjour.
Hola.
Konnichiwa.
Earning revenue all around the globe, and much of that revenue ends up in Ireland, where it pays next to nothing in tax. After a 3-year investigation into its tax affairs, today the European Commission ruled those arrangements were illegal.
This decision sends a clear message. Member states cannot give unfair tax benefits to selected companies, no matter if they are European or foreign, large or small, part of a group or not.
Money that Apple makes across the EU and beyond gets funneled to Ireland, which has an already low tax rate of 12.5%. But that's on profits made in Ireland. The international profits are not taxed at all, bringing Apple's overall rate to nearly zero, which is why the Commission now wants Ireland to collect £11 billion in backdated taxes on those international profits. You might think that any country would welcome such a massive windfall, but you'd be wrong.
Companies are buying the large...
Apple has a long history in Ireland. Steve Jobs brought the company here in the early 1980s, and it now employs nearly 6,000 people. It's an important corporate citizen, and the Irish government rejects the notion that it should be the tax police.
If there was a case that a company was not paying its appropriate taxes in a region like the European Union or internationally, it's not for Ireland, because part of that company operates in this country, to be the tax collection master for the entire world. Our responsibility as the Irish authorities is to collect the tax that is owed to us, and we do that in a consistent way, in a transparent way, and fully in accordance with the laws of this country. Unfortunately, what the Commission seems to be doing here is overreaching outside of their competencies into a matter of national competency, which is taxation.
US authorities are concerned that American companies are being targeted unfairly and that US taxpayers could lose out.
The first is we are concerned about a unilateral approach in state aid negotiations that threaten to undermine progress that we have made collaboratively with the Europeans to make the international taxation system fair.
Ireland has many attractions, and for international business, its low tax rates are definitely one. And as countries compete with each other to attract that business with lower tax rates, multinationals can play them off against each other to their own advantage. What's needed, most people say, is a coordinated global approach. What today's ruling and the ensuing acrimony has proved is that we're a long way from that just yet. By the banks of the River Liffey in Dublin, there was consensus that something needs to be done.
I think it's deserved. They should pay it back, really. I don't think anyone should be getting deals like sweetheart deals the way they have. If it was me, probably locked up in jail.
I think it's good essentially for Ireland to attract all those companies here, because the low tax of the companies kind of compensated by the quite good tax of the employees of the company.
But well, maybe a compromise could be made. Maybe it could be reduced from 13 billion to something a little bit lower, maybe, but to keep Apple here as well.
Hunting down the world's missing tax will require global authorities to pull together. On today's evidence, they are still out of sync.
Well, let's talk a little more about this. In a moment, we'll talk to our business correspondent, Michelle Fleury in New York. But first to Simon, who is reporting there from Dublin. He's there tonight. Simon, when we see the kind of entrenched positions we have on both sides, do you see any way of resolving this in the short or medium term?
Well, they are entrenched positions, Hugh. Talking to ministers today, the Irish government are adamant they don't want this money, they don't think they are owed it, and they will appeal this decision. They've got 2.5 months to appeal to the European courts. But I think we should look at today as not just an attempt to take a big bite out of Apple's enormous offshore cash pile. It's the opening up of a new front in a battle to try and track down and tax appropriately offshore profits. And what we've learnt today is that this new get tough approach from the European Commission is not going down at all well with the company Apple, which is probably not a surprise, but also not going down well here in Ireland, and also not well on Apple's home turf in the US. And US companies, remember, have $1.2 trillion of money parked overseas.
Well, with that in mind, Simon, let's go to New York and talk to Michelle there and ask Michelle really for a sense of the response there to today's ruling.
Well, Hugh, US politicians rarely agree on much, especially not in this fraction election year. But we are seeing politicians agreeing to hate, essentially, the EU's actions regarding Apple. The White House has said the EU has overstepped its authority. We heard from the President Obama's spokesperson, Josh Earnest, talking about the need for the US and the EU to act together, to work together in how to tax multinationals, not engage in unilateral action, as we've seen from the EU. The US Treasury Department made dark pronouncements with regards to this crackdown on foreign firms, basically saying that it threatens the business climate in Europe. And perhaps even more dramatic, one senior senator here in the United States accused the EU of a cheap money grab targeting US businesses. The irony in all of this is that the White House has had its own issues with companies, American companies, relocating their headquarters overseas to cut their tax bill. But in this instance, American corporations and the US government see their interests as being aligned. As for the US and the EU, well, tax is not the only area that's hit a rocky patch. The two sides are in the process of negotiating an international trade deal. American politicians here say they intend to complete those negotiations by the end of the year, but the word coming from Europe is very different. French President Francois Hollande saying that he doesn't see it happening on that timescale.
All right, Michelle, again, thanks very much. Michelle Fleury there with the latest in New York. And Simon, thanks to you as well in Dublin. The Italian Coast Guard is predicting that calm weather conditions are likely to encourage more migrants to risk the crossing from northern Libya in the next few days to try to reach Europe. 6,500 people were rescued yesterday by the Coast Guard off the coast of Libya. It's the biggest number in one day for several years. So far this year, more than 100,000 people have arrived in Italy. The latest estimate is that more than 2,700 people have died in that attempt. Our special correspondent, Ed Thomas, is in the Sicilian port of Messina. That is where new arrivals are being registered. He's just sent this report.
If you thought this crisis had gone away, think again. The desperate swim to safety at the first sign of hope. Stranded off the coast of Libya, men, women and children are packed into smugglers' boats. The youngest are twins, just a week old, and they're the lucky ones, because in just 24 hours, the waters here have been overwhelmed. This is one of 40 rescues since Monday. More than 7,000 have been saved. It means frantic days at sea, like never before.
We started about 5:30 in the morning, and we finished after 14 hours. And in all that time, we rescued over 5,000 people, according to the information we got from the authorities.
It seems that calmer weather has tempted thousands to make the journey from Libya to Italy. Many here are from Eritrea, others Somalia, escaping war and poverty, hoping for something better. And still, the people traffickers are paid. This year alone, more than 100,000 have used this route to cross into Italy. And again, this journey is claiming lives, with more than 3,000 drowned or lost in the Mediterranean. And as day turns to night, dry land and Italy, the risk has paid off. These people look exhausted. They have no possessions but their clothes, but still, they're alive.
The landing started a few minutes ago. We saw about 40 people, women and children and families from Western African countries. This year, since the beginning of this year, arrived by sea in Italy more than 40,700 young children.
And how many more are still to come? One estimate is that 250,000 people are waiting in Libya, willing to gamble everything for a new life in Europe. Ed Thomas, BBC News, Catania.
And still on Europe's migration crisis, the British and French governments have promised to work more closely together to deal with the problems in Calais, which is where thousands of migrants are living in the camp, which is known as the jungle. The Home Secretary Amber Rudd met her counterpart in Paris today amid growing calls from some opposition politicians in France to terminate the agreement which allows UK border officials to operate in the Calais area. Now, in the Libyan city of Sirte, pro-government forces say that they're advancing on the last strongholds of so-called Islamic State there. IS took control of the city last year, and there were fears that they'd use it as a base to try to attack Europe. Fierce fighting has been taking place in 2 districts of the city, and militia groups aligned to the Libyan government of national accord have been supported by US airstrikes. The BBC correspondent Feras Gilani and cameraman Jamie Bowles are one of the few international teams to have reached the front line, and they've sent us this report.
The tanks began the advance. The militants of so-called Islamic State are cornered. Forces loyal to the Libyan unity government are now pounding their positions and are close to regaining control of Sirte.
The unity government forces have mobilized all their ability ready to retake the last 2 districts still under ISIS control.
Islamic State hoped their headquarters in Sirte would provide a base to launch attacks into Europe. But now the extremists are about to be pushed out. The commander here tells me IS no longer have the manpower to hold the city.
All the area in front of us is under IS control. You can see them from here. It's the districts number 1 and 3. Within a few days, we will take over all this area by the help of God.
But the fight isn't over yet. IS militants quickly reply with sniper fire and suicide bombs, stopping the advance. The military spokesman told us that they had expected these attacks, and he is confident with his men's progress.
We are now in control of 75% of District 3, and IS fighters have retreated towards the coast. The fighting in District 1 is still intense, but we will not struggle to get the job done.
The gains here have come at a price. On the day we visited this hospital, over 30 fighters were killed, and we watched as medical staff battled to treat almost 200 men. Even if IS are forced out of Sirte, their threat continues. There is a strong feeling IS will regroup and return, causing more devastation in a struggling country with two governments and hundreds of militias competing for power. Firas Gilani, BBC News, Sirte.
Well, the so-called Islamic State group says that one of its senior leaders, its spokesman Abu Mohammed al-Adnani, has been killed. A website affiliated to IS, Amaq, said that he was killed while surveying operations to repel the military campaigns against Aleppo in Syria. Let's talk to our security correspondent, Frank Gardner, who's joined me here. Frank, you've mentioned this man before and underlining the fact that he was quite a big fish. What difference will this make, his death?
I think quite a lot, if it's true. And the reason I give that caveat is that IS in the past occasionally has pretended that some of its significant people are dead to kind of call off the hunt for them, to just put up a kind of false flag. But I think it probably is true and it's significant. I don't think I can think of anybody since the death of Jihadi John who is probably more significant for the West, who's been killed. This is a very significant blow for them because IS is an organisation that blends propaganda right into the heart of its strategy. It's part of its global operations. This man was both in charge of external operations and propaganda. In May this year, he issued a strident call for attacks both on the West and on all of their enemies. That resulted in the bloodiest Ramadan anybody can think of in living memory. And he's been targeting Britain, he's been targeting France and other countries. He'll be replaced, but by somebody without quite the same track record of military expertise and oratory. So it's a big blow for IS.
Frank, again, thanks very much. Frank Gardner there for us. Now, Katrina Percy has resigned as Chief Executive of the Southern Health NHS Trust, one of the biggest mental health trusts in the UK, which has been heavily criticised, among other things, for failing to fully investigate the deaths of hundreds of patients. But Ms Percy will continue with the trust in a different role, on the same salary, they say. Our social affairs correspondent, Michael Buchanan, who broke the story of the trust's failings, has the latest for us.
For 5 years, she'd led Southern Health, once named NHS Chief Executive of the Year. But today, Katrina Percy resigned, an inevitable conclusion after months of criticisms of the trust. People died following care failings by Southern Health. The victims include Connor Sparrowhawk, whose brother publicly confronted Ms Percy.
I thought it was extremely inappropriate that you'd even say that you might have added to our grief as a family when you've definitely piled it on, all of you.
We are all, myself personally and all of us, are incredibly sorry.
Today, Connor's mother told me she welcomed Katrina Percy's resignation.
It's good she's gone. It allows some fresh air. I've never ever understood how she could possibly go into work every morning, given everything that unfolded. And I mean, the buck does stop at the top.
Problems of the trust have mounted. An official report we obtained last December found that hundreds of unexpected deaths at Southern Health were not investigated. A failure of leadership was blamed. In April, the Inspectors of Care Quality Commission found significant problems. Again, management was criticised. Throughout it all, the Chief Executive stubbornly refused to go, until today. In a statement, Katrina Percy said, "I have reflected on the effect the ongoing personal media attention has had on staff and patients, and have come to the conclusion that this has made my role untenable." She continued, "Many will say I should have stepped down sooner," but added, "I stayed on as I firmly believed it was my responsibility to oversee the necessary improvements and to continue the groundbreaking work we have begun."
Created an action plan for the
She will, however, keep her near £250,000 annual pay and benefits, working as an advisor at the Trust. The regulator, NHS Improvement, said the deal gives taxpayers the best value for money.
This is someone who has failed in her leadership role. I find it absolutely scandalous. It beggars belief, and I think the public would just be horrified that the NHS is behaving in this way.
For the family of Conor Sparrowhawk, the child nicknamed Laughing Boy, today's resignation after a skilled and steadfast campaign for justice is a cause for satisfaction.
He had such a strong sense of justice himself that he would have been outraged that she stayed in position for so long. And so, yeah, thinking about Conor, then, yeah, there is a bit of justice, I suppose.
Michael Buchanan, BBC News, Oxford.
President Obama is to join Hillary Clinton on the election campaign trail next month in one of the states that could determine the outcome of the presidential election in November. That is Pennsylvania. It's a state that both Hillary Clinton and Donald Trump must win if they're to get to the White House, but they're both facing a challenge convincing many of that state's voters. Our correspondent Nick Bryant has been travelling across Pennsylvania talking to voters with just 70 days to go to Election Day.
Welcome to the town of Clinton, Pennsylvania, where the sign that greets you reads "Vote Donald Trump." It gets a nod of approval from Ron Zansky, a working-class voter who lost his job at the beginning of the year. He likes Donald Trump. He loathes Hillary Clinton.
I think he's sincere. I think he means what he says, and he speaks for a lot of people that, you know, from the heart, and I think that's pretty important.
What about Hillary?
She should be in prison.
We're senior citizens and we're voting for Trump.
This billboard has become something of a tourist attraction, and what makes it all the more noteworthy, it was erected by a longtime Democrat, Mike Lieber.
For the last 30 years, she hasn't spoken a truthful word.
In the back of his pickup truck, another sign reads "Crooked Hillary." Like two-thirds of American voters in what often feels like a lesser of two evils election, he just doesn't trust her.
I don't care what happens. If the dog catcher was running against Hillary Clinton, I would vote for the dog catcher.
Further down the road is Aliquippa, one of those faded steel towns where Hillary Clinton is vulnerable. But more than a third of voters here are black, and that helps her. Donald Trump has recently reached out to African Americans after a poll suggested just 1% support him.
What about his appeal to African Americans?
Absolutely no. No. If I seen a black guy voting for Trump, I'd have to do like this and rub his skin to make sure. And then you'd see the truth, because he wouldn't be black.
The local mayor, Dwayne Walker, reckons Donald Trump's outreach to black voters is primarily intended to persuade whites he's not racist. He sees it as a deathbed conversion that doesn't ring true.
He's not preaching about stronger together. He's not preaching better together. He's not preaching those things that bring people together. He's preaching things that are dividing us. And we can ill afford, America can ill afford to be divided right now.
Upriver is Pittsburgh, a thrusting, prosperous city where you find evidence of what's being called an education gap opening up in the American electorate. Donald Trump has done well with white working-class voters, but he's had a harder time attracting the support of whites with college degrees. In fact, he's in danger of becoming the first Republican presidential candidate in 60 years not to win a majority of white graduates. Monday Night Baseball at the Pittsburgh Pirates, and a high school band blasts out a high-decibel version of Aretha Franklin's Respect, something that both candidates have struggled to command. But of two unpopular contenders in what's often been a cartoonish election, it's Hillary Clinton, who for many in the pricier seats in this stadium passes a basic presidential plausibility test.
She's the most qualified candidate, and she's not crazy.
I can't believe that he could actually obtain the nomination of the Republican Party. It's a disgrace.
I cannot stand Donald Trump. I think everything that comes out of his mouth is a disaster.
But questions of trust and ethics bedevil Hillary Clinton, and that's partly why Donald Trump is still in the game. Nick Bryant, BBC News, Pittsburgh.
Now, the controversial badger cull in England is being extended to try to prevent the spread of tuberculosis in cattle. Some 1,500 badgers were killed last year, but now the aim is to cull 10,000 before the end of this year. Ministers say it is necessary to deal with bovine TB. Critics say the policy is inhumane and ineffective. Our Rural Affairs correspondent Claire Marshall has more details.
Tonight, after darkness falls on these Dorset hills, trained marksmen are likely to be at work shooting badgers. Their exact location is being kept secret for security reasons. This is a new target area, part of a major expansion of the controversial policy announced today. The badger cull will now take place in new areas in Cornwall, Herefordshire, Devon, Gloucestershire, Somerset and Dorset. In 2015, around 1,500 badgers were shot. But this year, the target is much higher. 10,000 animals are to be culled by the end of November.
And lots of hedgerows.
Conservationists say it flies in the face of scientific evidence.
It's a huge scale compared with previous years, and the problem is it's unnecessary. It's unlikely, based on the government's own advice, to be successful. There are better ways of doing this.
But the government believes that killing badgers is a vital part of fighting bovine TB. Almost 30,000 cows had to be slaughtered last year as a result of the disease, and it's still spreading. Wiltshire farmer Stephen King has lost cows and a year's worth of business after TB was found in his herd. Months of testing by vets, and finally he has a clear. Stephen doesn't hate badgers, but can't see another way forward.
It shows us that perhaps, the government ministers and are trying to take things forward for us. I don't think really not doing anything just isn't sustainable, because the problem will only get worse.
Badgers do carry TB, but so do other mammals such as deer, and the infection can remain in the ground for months at a time. One of the key problems, though, is how easily infected cows pass the disease on to other cows. So the operation is underway. The government says that eradicating this reservoir of the disease will help to provide a solution. Claire Marshall, BBC News in Dorset.
A scheme to raise money to buy tickets for thousands of Brazilian children to watch events at the Paralympic Games in Rio has already hit the first target of $25,000, with money continuing to come in. The Games start in just over a week, and Britain is sending a team of more than 260 athletes. This week we'll be hearing from some of them, and we start with Joe Townsend from Eastbourne, who will be competing in the para-triathlon. He was injured while serving with the Royal Marines in Afghanistan. Our reporter Kate Gray, herself a former Paralympian, has been to meet him.
In February in 2008, when I stepped on the improvised explosive device, I didn't really know what I was ever going to do with my life, and kind of just remember sort of sitting there on the battlefield in Afghanistan, like thinking, yeah, what am I going to do now?
6 weeks in intensive care, 3 years in rehabilitation, and over 50 operations. The road to recovery hasn't been easy for Joe.
Even like daft things like carrying a cup of tea whilst being in a wheelchair is a completely different challenge. So for me, it's just been a steep learning curve and trying to find ways around doing just mundane everyday tasks. I know a lot of guys kind of really struggle and dwell in the past, sort of what's happened to them, and I mean, it's fully understandable if you've been sort of young, fit and active and have something sort of horrendous happen to you, then it's easy to look back and think, oh, why me? Why has this happened to me? But I could just look forward in life and look to see what I could strive to achieve and move forwards, really. Once I was maybe 6 months into my rehabilitation at Headley Court, I started trying different adaptive sports. You're kind of free and your disability becomes irrelevant. Kind of got that competitive edge back and that spark, and was like, actually, I like this, and it gives me the opportunity to push myself again.
Despite the fact his sport of triathlon was not included in the London 2012 Paralympics, he still found a way to be involved.
Joe Townsend.
That day there and actually coming into the stadium with all those thousands of people cheering, that kind of really set it in my head that actually I want to be there in Rio, but not for a theatrical piece. I want to be there with my sport.
Joe has spent the last 4 years preparing for Rio and believes he's now in the best shape of his life.
Triathlon's one of those sports, and anything can happen really. If I can deliver my best race on the day and give like 100% of what I know I've been doing in training, then yeah, I've definitely got the option of getting on the podium. I served my country as a Royal Marine in Afghanistan, and being able to fly the GB flag again and represent my country as an athlete, it's just, yeah, it's coming from one life to another, but just a fantastic experience, and I can't wait.
Well, that was Joe Townsend, who will be competing in the Paralympics from next week, and he was talking there to my colleague Kate Gray. Well, it's been a record-breaking day at Trent Bridge, where England's cricketers have been playing Pakistan in a one-day international. England recorded the highest ever score in one-day cricket, and Alex Hales broke the scoring record by an English batsman in a one-day international. Our sports correspondent Patrick Geary was watching.
Late summer in Nottingham, the kind of afternoon where you'd be more likely to see a cricket ball in the Trent Bridge sky than a cloud, particularly with Alex Hales out there. Hales had 100 halfway through England's innings, so word got out, clear the bars. Here was a chance to witness history. England's highest individual score in a one-day international stood at 167. This was the moment Hales set the mark higher. Hales and Joe Root both went, but others took on the record book. Jos Buttler needed 22 balls to smash England's fastest one-day 50. Just try and catch him. In a dizzying swirl of sixes and fours, England were headed to a total no team had previously managed. With the last ball, they reached 444, an all-time high. How do you follow that? Well, Pakistan never got close to chasing the unprecedented. They were all out for 275, and England wrap up the series with 2 to play. This has been one-day cricket with only one team in it. Patrick Geary, BBC News.
Quick reminder, Newsnight's on BBC Two. Here's Evan.
Those stonking big multinational companies have had a good run for a few decades. The world has worked in their favour. So does the EU's get tough policy on Apple today tell us something's changing, that the party is over for the big corporations? Join me now on BBC Two.
Newsnight with Evan here on BBC One. It's time for the news where you are. Have a good night.